Hi, my name's Meg, and this video clinic is called Meal Planning for the Outdoor Adventurer. We're going to cover the basics of micro and macronutrients that your body needs as fuel to actually get outside and stay healthy, and then we're going to move into how to actually plan your meals. What components are going to drive your decision making when actually packing the food that you need for your trip. And lastly, we're going to talk about some of my favorite foods that I like to bring on trips to really hit all of the components that your body needs to stay strong. Alright, so a little bit of background. You need to be considering three main things when planning your meals for trips. The amount of calories you're going to need, your macronutrients, and your micronutrients. Calories are going to change from trip to trip depending on how strenuous the trip is, where you're going, how many days it is, stuff like that. Your macronutrients are going to be things like protein, fat, and carbs that are going to help you sustain your activity for the duration. And then your micronutrients are going to be things like vitamins and minerals that overall are really, really crucial for just the general operation and efficiency of your body. So we'll break those down in a little bit and hopefully clear up any questions you may have. Alright, so let's talk about calories. This is probably one of the most easy components of your nutrition to consider, and that's because it's kind of just mathematical. It's calories in versus calories out. The amount of food you need to eat per day is going to be reflective of how much you're actually burning. So consider a downwind paddling trip might be a little bit less strenuous than summiting a mountain. So each body is different, and it is important to know what your specific caloric demands are. But my general rule of thumb is to try to eat until satisfaction on trips. You're probably going to be burning more than your daily life, so keeping that in mind when you're making these food selections is going to be really important. And then aside from how much you're actually burning, what I want you to take away from this clinic is that the type of calorie or the quality of calorie really does matter at the end of the day. So a sugary Pop-Tart might give you a quick fix, but in the long run, that might actually work against you whenever you're trying to make really healthy choices while you're outdoors. So stay tuned for the rest of the clinic because we'll talk about how to make some more of those efficient calorie selections. Okay, so let's talk about macronutrients. This is the second on the list, and in my mind is the easiest way for me to compartmentalize where my nutrition is actually coming from. So we're going to talk about protein, carbs, and fat. The breakdown here, whenever you are actually putting your meals together, is like a general guideline is 50% carbohydrates, 25% protein, and 25% fat. Obviously, this is going to vary widely from meal to meal, as you might not have all of these things readily available, but it is more of just a guideline to help you make your nutrition selections. So let's talk about each one. Carbohydrates are where you're going to be getting the most of your calories from. They are the way carbohydrates provide your body with its main energy source. So essentially what happens, if you think about a loaf of bread, bread fills you up, it can give you quick energy because it breaks down in a way that your body absorbs as sugar and gets like a quick release of energy. If you're not eating enough carbohydrates throughout the day, it's very easy to feel sluggish, and especially when you're going out on trips, having readily available energy for your body to keep moving and functioning at high capacity, it's super important to have these carbs to keep your body energized to complete each task at the end of each day. The next thing we want to talk about is protein. So everyone talks about protein. It's kind of like a buzzword when it comes to nutrition, but essentially what we want to know about protein is that it is crucial for the structure and maintenance of muscle growth and just cell function in general. So, or I guess I should say muscle function. So the way protein works is that every single cell needs protein to function efficiently, and if your body is exerting itself a whole lot, and say doesn't have enough carbohydrates to keep the energy flowing, your body's going to start taking from your protein reserves. And in a lot of cases, when your body starts pulling from protein, that's when you start to see muscle loss and fatigue. So actually being able to maintain your body's physical capacities might be a little bit harder. You might start seeing like muscle loss and fatigue early on. And when we're going outside and hiking and running and paddling and stuff like that, making sure your muscles have all of the energy they need to stay strong is going to be really, really important. Especially if your trips go from 1 day to week-long trips or 2 weeks. Being able to have the right breakdown of nutrition is going to be really important for sustained endurance. Which kind of leads me to my last macronutrient, which is fat. Fat kind of gets a bad rap sometimes because it seems like everyone's trying to trim fat or keep it out of their diet, but fat plays a really, really important role as well. So carbs break down really fast, right? They're kind of like a quick fix. They give your body a buzz of energy and stuff like that to keep you going right in the moment. But fat is more of a stored energy. So whenever you have carbs, say in the morning, your body's going to burn through them really fast. However, if with breakfast you had a handful of nuts or another food that was high in fat, beyond just the quick buzz of glucose that your body's going to be getting from carbohydrates, your body will then be able to pull from fat stores, once again keeping your body from pulling from your muscle and protein, which is really important. So having some fat in there is good for extended trips and anything that you have to be going all day. Making sure your body has a nice healthy reserve of fat is really, really important. So that breakdown once again is carbohydrates at 50% of your diet, and then protein around 25% and around 25% fat. Once again, these can look different from day to day, but that is probably one of the easiest ways to maintain weight and body functioning when picking out your food. Okay, so the third and final component of our background information today is going to be micronutrients. Micronutrients are composed of vitamins and minerals, and they're kind of like the cherry on top that just brings everything we've talked about so far together. Before I talk about what each one is, I realized that I didn't mention that fat, healthy amounts of fat in your body, is crucial for the absorption of your vitamins and minerals. So if for no other reason to consume fat, you need it to get these guys to actually do their job. So what are they? Vitamins are going to be what's essential for really strong bone health and immune system support, and minerals are going to be important for nervous system function, muscle support, and oxygen delivery, and just healing overall. So all these minerals work together to put the macronutrients to work for your body, so they're super important to consume, and I'll be talking about where you get those later on in the video. Alright, so moving on to the planning portion of this clinic. Before I start talking about some of the nitty-gritty details, I just want to throw it out there that the structure of how you plan your trip's food is going to be heavily influential on the type of food that you actually bring. So, for example, a weekend-long backpacking trip may look like heavier meals that allow you to sustain through the weekend, especially if it's cold outside. Having things high in fat and protein and carbohydrates is going to be really, really important to keep your body warm and prepared to keep going throughout the whole weekend. However, a day-long cycling trip or just endurance activity where you just need to have quick energy and glucose dumps and stuff like that, they're very, very different. They're both outside and they're both really high in exertion, but what your body's actually going to be needing for those sports is going to look a lot different. So bear with me as we move through some of the variations, and do realize that I don't have a set equation for what I'm going to be looking at when packing food for a trip, but it is important to take a little bit of time to be mindful and a little bit reflective on what are you actually going to be doing, and then think a little bit about what your body would actually be needing in that moment. So let's talk about some of the things. I do have a list here off to the side to help me stay on top of the different things you might want to consider, so sorry if I look into the corner, but it's going to help us stay on track. So, as I mentioned before, physical exertion is going to be your main contributor for how you should be planning which calories that you're going to be needing. Remember earlier I mentioned calories in versus calories out. This is going to be specific to your body, so know yourself. My general amount of calories burned isn't that high, however, my best friend is like a machine when it comes to destroying calories. Even on a day he doesn't work out. So knowing that you versus your friend's day's worth of calories might look different, and that's okay, but do try to fuel yourself for success when going out on trips. The next thing to consider that I like to think about is trip length. How many days is it going to be? Is it going to be a one-day trip where it's just go, go, go? Or is it going to be a week-long, 2-week-longs where the quality of food you're putting in your body for days at a time is really going to make a difference in the long run. A quick day of running where just simple sugars is all your body really needs is going to be handled easier than day after day after day of slamming Pop-Tarts. So I don't know why I keep going back to Pop-Tarts, but that's just what I keep thinking about. So yeah, it really isn't a catch-all. Different trips are going to require different foods, and in general, the higher quality foods you put in your body over an extended period of time is going to impact how you feel, how your belly's going to feel, how your brain's feeling, if you're feeling sluggish, if your body's putting on weight because it's not used to eating 1,000 Pop-Tarts a week. So yeah, those are all just things to consider. The next is activity type. So with this, I really just want to talk about considering what type of food you are bringing. Can you bring canned beans and canned corn, really heavy things that are really yummy, or are you going to be doing something where weight matters? Do you want to bring a bunch of canned goods on your back for a backpacking trip? Probably not. Looking at foods that are similar in nutrition but presented differently have been really successful for at least my friends and I when going out, and people just across the board. So think about an apple. Your body wants that fruit, right? Simple sugars, carbohydrates, really, really good to keep your body going. However, bringing a full apple on a trip is going to really weigh you down compared to bringing something like a dehydrated apple. So I think the takeaway from this point is see what kind of options you have for the different food choices you are bringing on a trip. I know I've been surprised by how many foods do come dehydrated or just add water type situations, but they really do make a difference. So I encourage you to do research and see what kind of options you do have for each trip. And then kind of on the type of food, consider the packaging. If you're going to bring canned goods, you're going to need a can opener, and you're going to have to be able to get rid of the trash. And over time, all of that can really accumulate. And a good trick that I've found over the years is that buying things in bulk packaging and then breaking them down per day has been really, really helpful. So either you can eliminate waste by not having a bunch of like single-use plastics and stuff like that you're going to have to probably carry out of your campsite area anyways, and have reusable bags or just lightweight options for when you're out on the trail or around town or anything like that. But just being aware again of what type of materials you're bringing out, how they're going to weigh you down after the food has been consumed. These are all just kind of tips and tricks for knowing what is a good option for you to pack. And then the last thing to consider when thinking about food, and maybe it's not the last, this isn't an all-inclusive list, but I also like to consider food preparation. So if a trip is going to be high speed, no time for sleep, no time for breaks, busting out a camp stove to make your coffee or heat up your oatmeal might not be a really reasonable option. So think about what are going to be the expectations of this trip. Is it going to be relaxed? Can you have that campfire meal or cook in that Dutch oven? Or should you be considering quicker options, stuff that's going to be really ready to go but still nourish your body with the nutrition that it needs? And I do want to just say once again that this list isn't a all-inclusive list. It's just to kind of help you spark ideas and start the conversation with you and your trip crew to see what are the expectations, what are some things that might be future hindrances or anything like that. The list of considerations I just covered It's important to know that this isn't an all-inclusive list. However, it is a good jumping off point. So when you're planning your trip with either yourself or your friends, these are all just circumstantial things that might influence the type of food you want to be packing. It's more of like a list to get your brain firing for things that might influence the food that you want to be bringing. The last thing that is, aside from circumstantial restrictions or scenarios, would be your personal diet. So with allergies and intolerances for gastrointestinal purposes being on the rise recently, it is really important to think about how that's going to affect where your calories come from. Meats are like jerky and stuff like that is a really quick way to get a lot of protein for really lightweight, but there are a whole lot of people out there who can't handle red meat. Like their digestive systems just don't allow it. Or personal preference. There's vegan and vegetarian and paleo and keto. There's like all of these diets, and while there isn't a tried and true fail-safe method that everyone needs to use for each of these diet restrictions, they do kind of prompt you to have to be a little bit more creative on your meal selection. I have a whole slew of dietary restrictions myself, and I found that I couldn't eat what my friends were eating. And the first few trips I went out, it was kind of a trial and error period. Eating packaged foods didn't work for me like it did for some of my friends, or realizing that a carrot has far less nutrition or like caloric value than a roll of salami. So having to get creative and put thought in before you go on your trip is really going to be important, especially if you or your pals have these diet restrictions. In no way is it impossible to accommodate on a trip, but from what I found, it just takes a lot of beforehand research and trial and error to figure out how you need to fuel yourself best when going outdoors. So open the conversation, start to do research on your own. There's a whole lot of really cool resources online for people who have found their creative ways to tackle dietary restrictions, but it's no joke. And if you have the ability to frame it as more of a challenge and opportunity rather than an inhibitor, I don't know, you might find that it is a way to share your lifestyle with your friends and folks around you who may be struggling with some of the same things. Alrighty, so we are knocking through this curriculum. Before we move on to the next portion, I want to do a quick recap to make sure that everyone is still on board with what we've talked about so far. So, okay, to start off, background information. What does our body need? We need the proper amount of calories in versus calories out. We need to focus on our macronutrient breakdown, so 50% carbohydrates, 25% protein, and 25% fats, all really important. And then we also need to make sure that our bodies are getting enough micronutrients, or vitamins and minerals, to help the actual interworkings of our body absorb all the food that we're putting in. The next thing we want to think about after the breakdown of nutrients is how much do we actually need to eat? What should we be eating? How are we going to be carrying it? There's a whole lot of components there when it actually comes to planning your meals that are really important to consider. And kind of to sum up everything we've talked about so far, I want to say that each of these items is heavily dependent on an individual and their preferences, which moves me into the next portion of this clinic that we're going to be talking about, and that's food selection. Okay, when it comes to food selection, aim to select foods that provide the most bang for your buck. In other words, just be intentional with what it is that you're selecting. Instead of thinking, oh, what food is going to make me more full when I'm really hungry, think about the nutritional gains of what that food might have to offer you. And it's at that point I would encourage you to once again kind of consider your macronutrients. So there it is, carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Oftentimes the foods that are going to make us the most full instantly and cheaply are going to be foods that are really heavily weighted towards carbohydrates, which aren't bad and do have their place. However, for sustained physical performance, really considering those factors are going to really help you stay in your best shape. So, I'm looking at my list again, I'm sorry, but some of the foods that I want to talk about today are whole foods that I think might sometimes be overlooked when it comes to meal planning. And what's cool about whole foods, and if you live in an area that has access to bulk food purchasing or just like normal discount stores, I don't know if discount's the right word, but just grocery stores, a lot of these foods can be made for quite cheap. A bag of mixed nuts or dried fruit might end up costing you a substantially less amount of money than buying like 40 granola bars, and allow you to have more variety and customization based on your diet. So when I'm thinking about the foods that I want to select for a trip, oftentimes I think about what is it my body is going to be craving. And for me, and probably for most people, the two biggest things I find myself wanting are salty foods and sweet foods. This is really cool because when your body's craving salty foods and sweet foods, it's generally because it needs those things. So salt is a good indicator that your body needs electrolytes, and electrolytes is just another weird word for salt, but essentially you have to be able to keep this like salt and sugar and water ratio in your body for everything to function appropriately. I don't know the science of it specifically, so I don't want to go into it, but it's matter of fact that your body is going to be craving salts and sugars. So, and the sugars oftentimes come from your carbohydrates that are breaking down into glucose for brain function. But all that to say, whenever selecting foods, I like to think, let me make sure I have a well balance of salty foods and sweet foods, and then at the end of the day also make sure that combined they're going to be providing my body with all the macros that it really needs. So let's break it down. Salty foods, I have stuff written down like nuts, whole grains, legumes, seeds, and meat, if that's your flavor. So nuts have protein and fat. That's it. They're like bombs of it. They're really high in calories and a go-to food for mine all the time. Whole grains offer carbs and protein, which are really good. They're not heavily processed or processed at all, so when you're consuming them, you are just getting protein and carbs, and your body's just going to break it down in a way that makes it really happy. Next, for salty foods, we have stuff like legumes and seeds. So things like that are going to be high in carb, protein, and fat. Specifically, seeds are high in fat and legumes are high in protein. But these are things that can really easily be cooked ahead of time and dehydrated to provide your body with the fuel that it needs in a lightweight form. And it's really easy on your digestive tract to keep all of them down. And then lastly, meat. So like jerked meat, is jerked the right word? Dried meat, jerky, stuff like that. Your body, often I think you can find jerky in like salty and sweet, but this is going to be just like massive amounts of protein hits, and depending on the type of meat, provide your body with like fatty acids and all the protein that it could ever want from these meats, and are often a very lightweight option. So salty, you have a whole slew of options, and that's where you're going to get a ton of your macros. And then when it comes to sweet foods, my list is a little bit shorter, but it kind of it breaks down simpler that way. So for sweet, I have fruit and simple sugars. So a go-to for me is having dehydrated fruit. It really just hits the spot every time, and if I'm ever feeling really sluggish, eating a handful of raisins or something like that really does just perk me up. And oftentimes when eating dehydrated fruit, they are absolutely loaded with calories in a way that's seemingly insane. So it's kind of like a double whammy in that it gives you quick energy, but it also gives you a caloric load that your body might be requiring. And then aside from dehydrated fruit, stuff like simple sugars, honey, sugar packets, agave, electrolyte mixes, candy, chocolate, stuff like that, where when you put it in your mouth, you just get so happy, and it breaks down to like exactly what your body needs right away. So those are really easily absorbed and are going to offer your body a really quick reward that requires, it's like essentially instant gratification. So salty sweets, super important when fueling your body with what it needs. The hotter it is outside, the more your body's going to sweat. It's going to need those salts, and it's going to need the sugars to keep you going. So yeah, that's kind of my list there. Alright, so that concludes our video for today. But before I leave you guys, I do want to end with one word, and that is intention. We covered a whole lot of different information today, and ideally that's just the building block for how you proceed with meal planning in the future. But the biggest component to your success for prepping meals for your adventures is going to be making your food decisions intentionally. Consider what you're doing, consider who you are, and how you want to fuel your body for success. So I encourage you to get out there and do your own research. I think that's going to probably be the most beneficial factor in making sure you stay happy and healthy outdoors. But once again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you learned something, and feel free to reach out to Outdoor Pursuits if you have any more questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.